Greetings, and welcome to our ML631 Organizational Change Group Assignment. We are happy to have you with us and hope this experience will provide you the opportunity to evaluate our analysis of this organization. To start, I'd like to introduce each one of our team members and talk through our individual roles as part of this overall presentation. I will also be walking us through the overall outline of the presentation itself and talking through just a very simple general flow of the presentation that we will be working through. I'm Kyle Fleet. Of course, I will be doing the introduction and just providing an overall context to the organization itself and providing you with some just key terms and that you may need to know, introducing you to a couple faces that you may need to know in order to get a bit better grasp of the organization as a whole. Steve Hoffman will be analyzing the culture of the Apprentice Institute and really talking about the environment of Friends University as a whole. Lindsay will be walking us through some of the changes that the Institute is going through and perhaps even talking about some of the changes that they may need to go through as they turn the page into this next chapter of the Institute and of the university. Ralph Holbrook will be discussing some of the conflict that's happening there at the university, both on a macro overarching level, organizational level, and also on a micro level with the institution, the Apprentice Institution itself. And then Brey will be talking through just some of the communication factors that are playing a part in the conflict, in the culture, and just really talking through just some of the communication things that are happening there on both the micro and macro level. Finally, I'll be coming back around just to provide some follow-up, just some final concluding thoughts, and perhaps even just some last concluding questions as well. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our organization as a whole. Now, in order to understand this, you've got to understand there's going to be two levels by which we'll be talking about the organization. On one level, kind of a macro level, there's Friends University, and Friends University is a university here in Wichita, Kansas. It was founded in 1898 by the Quaker Church. Although they are no longer strictly a Quaker university, they still hold tight to their Christian roots and to their Quaker background. They enroll approximately 2,800 students each year, and as an overall mission statement, they are designed to equip students to honor God and to serve others by integrating their intellectual and spiritual and professional lives. Their vision, Friends University will become a regional university with national programs and an international presence. Just one more note on the university as a whole before we go to the next slide. It has a strong Christian background, but it doesn't necessarily claim itself to be an overall expansive Christian school. It is a liberal arts school, and it does have definitely a Christian influence, but the Christian influence isn't necessarily woven into every part of the university itself. And so one of the challenges that you'll hear us talking about and talking through is the fact that this is a school that has broken away from a good chunk of its Christian tradition, but is still grappling with the role of its Christian background in its present day context. We thought it would be important to draw your attention to the overall values of Friends University, again on this overarching macro level. Again, once noting this tension or just the struggle between this Christian tradition background and kind of going into the future, understanding what that Christianism may or may not mean for each facet of the university. And so here we go. Number one, the first, they believe that the underlying mission of all higher education is the search for truth. And they define that truth in Christian terms, grounded in Christian tradition and in their Quaker heritage. And they affirm that truth is of and from God, and that search is a lifelong process. The second value adds an element of character to that idea of truth. It says that they insist that the search for truth be characterized by both excellence and informed by integrity. In the larger value statement, it goes on to express those and to define those terms as a whole as well. This next value is one in which that might start to separate them from other Christian universities and organizations. It says, as searchers and learners, they support curiosity and research and assign great value to diversity of experience. As people who value such diversity and openness, we approach new situations and people with goodwill and humility. We believe in equity and in the dignity of all people. Again, so very relational based, very Christian maybe in its core, but not necessarily explicitly Christian terminology. And finally, once again, another very Christian idea of community. They accept and cherish their responsibility to care for one another in their learning and working relationships. They understand that a part of that care must be to become better stewards of what they have been given. They take care of the future as if it was already there. Now, when we're presenting on Friends University, we're actually going to be taking a closer look at the Apprentice Institute itself. Now, to understand this, if you think of just, again, the Apprentice Institute as kind of that micro-organizational level, you could consider them a team, or, you know, in graduate studies, you could understand them as a school within the broader university campus. And so the Apprentice Institute, was founded by James Bryan Smith about 4 years ago. It exists on 3 levels. Number one, to provide an educational experience in the area of Christian spirituality. And basically what that looks like, what that means is there's a second degree undergraduate program that students who are going to the university, while they're majoring in one thing, they can get a second major in Christian spiritual formation. Okay, and so then on another level, then they also have the apprentice experience and as well as an adult program. So there's kind of several facets of the educational level of the Apprentice Institute. Number 2, they exist to develop resources for individual and church renewal. We're going to expose you to some of those resources as well, but also to talk through, as an institute, they look at themselves as, the premier thinkers on Christian spiritual formation in America. And so they actually travel all over the world doing workshops and providing conferences for churches in the area of Christian spiritual formation. So they're very internationally known. They work with a lot of denominations. They work in a lot of countries and really provide a lot of help and support just through their resources, which can all be found on their website as well. Finally, they also exist to engage in research to advance the field of Christian formation. They hold a national conference once a year in Wichita, Kansas, and a lot of the research that they do throughout the year is then presented there. And they're always coming up with new thoughts, new ideas, connecting new thinkers to those who are looking to get involved in spiritual formation, and to their students as well. Again, we thought it was important to draw your attention to the vision of the Apprentice Institute, and maybe to even, talk about the contrast a little bit between that and the Friends University vision. So specifically, the Institute is the renewal of the world and the church through the formation of new people and new communities who have become living a radical Christian life in the conformity to the teaching of Jesus as his apprentice in the midst of the world, whether in secular or ministry positions. So again, very explicit in their Christ development thinking, and not necessarily for the sake of churches or the sake of ministry, but really providing a light into both specific religious organizations, churches, ministries, but also into the secular world as well. So really, that's why it operates as why they have a second degree program where you can't just major in Christian spiritual formation, but you can get a second major, is because they really pair it with other things, the other majors that other students might be going into. So, for instance, somebody might be majoring in psychology, but what does it mean to be spiritually formed while doing psychology? What does it mean to be following Christ as a psychologist? And that's kind of the tension that they live in. And so here's Jim Smith, or Dr. James Bryan Smith. He's the executive director, and really you might consider him the architect of the Apprentice Institute as a whole. If you know the name of Dallas Willard, Dallas Willard is one of Jim Smith's direct mentors. Dallas Willard also mentored Richard Foster, who also mentored Jim Smith as well. And so Jim Smith comes from this kind of rich, kind of modern day spiritual formation background, working with both those guys as well as guys like Eugene Peterson and some of those guys as well. So he's the executive director. The Apprentice Institute is his brainchild, and basically came out of this desire to help Christians learn how to be formed into Christ's likeness. And so in Dallas Willard's book, The Divine Conspiracy, Chapter 9 is entitled Developing a Curriculum for Christ Likeness. And so a couple years ago, what happened was Jim Smith was talking to Dallas Willard, and he asked Dallas what that would actually look like, and Dallas looked at Jim Smith and said, "Well, Jim, you're the educator. Why don't you tell me?" And it was out of that Jim Smith started developing resources that he then got into the hands of churches, and he saw how those were acting as programs and helping churches to develop discipleship programs and develop their congregation. And out of that, he eventually built the Institute at Friends University to help just better equip students and to really be a hub for these getting these resources out into the world. So he does still teach at Friends University. He's one of the professors of theology there. And listed below are the four main resources in the Apprentice book series. So there's Good and Beautiful God, Good and Beautiful Life, Good and Beautiful Community, and Hidden in Christ. And we just thought we'd take a moment just to introduce you to Mike Clifford as well. He was the primary source of information for the project, really opening the door for us to evaluate and really giving us all the information that we needed for the project. So Mike is a recruiter. He manages the recruitment for the Apprentice Institute. He also is the primary academic advisor for their 75 or so students. He's a resource for regional Christian schools, which basically means he helps get the apprentice resources that are available at Friends University into the hands of the faculty and staff of Christian high schools in the region. And so he will actually go around and help these Christian schools develop discipleship programs and really help understand what it means to do Christian spiritual formation in their high school context. And so he's also a speaker and a teacher. He teaches at Friends University, but also speaks at some national conferences around the United States, and will also go out and help the apprentice team when they're sent to Brazil and Australia and around the world to help churches form and shape discipleship programs. So he's pretty hands-on with a lot of things, has a lot of experience being there several years now, and we just want to thank him and just kind of tip our hats in appreciation to all the work he did with us.
Hello, I'm Steve Hoffman, and I will be discussing culture at the Apprentice Institute for Spiritual Formation and at Friends University. When he discusses in his book Organizational Culture and Leadership, Edgar Schein talks about culture this way. The culture of a group can now be defined as a pattern of shared basic assumptions learned by a group as it solves its problems of external adaptation and internal integration. And at the basic assumptions level, we will see the huge differences that exist between the culture at the Apprentice Institute and at Friends University. This is what the culture of Friends University looks like. It's 107 years old. It has a high academic culture. Its leadership is hierarchical. There is a president, there are several vice presidents, and there are directors below that. The faculty holds much of the power. Change at the university is slow. The organization is cumbersome, with many competing interest groups and political factors. The culture of the Apprentice Institute is much different. It's only 5 years old. It is more innovative and dynamic in its approach to change and leadership. Its leadership is horizontal and project-based. In other words, each team member has has a project that they are in charge of, or an area of the ministry that they are the point person for, and if the discussion is involving that area, then that team member is in charge. The leadership culture is very much outside the norm of Friends University, and their main goal is to provide ministry in the area of cutting edge spiritual formation. And their mentality is dreaming. They're asking questions like what's new, what's next, what's innovative. And as you can tell already, there are some significant cultural challenges between the Institute and the university as a whole. The Apprentice Institute is actually a subculture of Friends University, and they represent what Schein calls the operator subculture. The Institute is more action oriented. They are the ones with the skills and knowledge necessary to accomplish its mission. They're more hands on, they're more focused on one particular thing, and that is providing spiritual formation resources, books, conferences, and undergraduate resources at Friends University. And they have the capacity to innovate and are better positioned to make key changes in this area. While the leadership at Friends represents another subculture, they represent what Schein would call the executive subculture. Meetings are exclusive to job title and level within the organization. We talked to Mike from the Apprentice Institute, and he told us that even if the discussion is about something that he is in charge of, because he's not a director, he's not allowed to go to director level meetings, and that's where a lot of the decisions are made, not by the ones doing the work, but by those toward the top of the organizational hierarchy. The Apprentice Institute is newer, it's more innovative, and it's more adaptive than Friends University as a whole. And as Mike told us, the Institute must slow down its operations in order to work more closely with the university. They're a smaller group, they're focused on one thing, and when it comes to involving itself within the university as a whole, they find that they have to slow down what they want to do in their decision-making process in order to move at the speed that the university is willing to go. Each group is working with different basic assumptions, and that is the key issue at play in the dynamic between the institute and the university. The Institute is geared toward ministry and the expansion of its influence in this field of spiritual formation, while the university is geared toward higher academic learning and its ongoing survival. And the university wants the Institute to work within those parameters. And because of their different basic assumptions, because they're so different, uh, and they define their cultures so much, that the institute and the university has trouble working together, and it makes
Hi, my name is Mike Lindsay, and I'm going to discuss the change that's present within the Apprentice Institute. Change exists on several levels within this organization, so I'm briefly going to touch on the social change that's at the heart and the vision of the Apprentice Institute. I'll talk about the organizational change within the Apprentice Institute itself, and finally I'll spend the most time talking about the organizational change between the Apprentice Institute and Friends University. Social change is at the heart of the Apprentice Institute. It's part of their identity, their DNA. It's one of their core values. And what's on the screen comes directly from the Apprentice Institute's website. It's their vision for their institution. It says, "The vision of the Apprentice Institute is the renewal of the world and the church through the formation of new people and new communities who have begun living a radical Christian life in conformity to the teachings of Jesus and his apprentices in the midst of the world, whether in secular or ministry positions." The way that Mike described this in his interview was to say that they wanted to create a center of excellence for spiritual formation, and that societal change would take place on a micro level. So through their institute and through their curriculum, students would learn a different way to approach secular positions and ministry positions. The way he talked about that would be, how does having a Christian worldview and a Christian framework change the way that you do business, change the way that you practice medicine, etc., and so on. Organizational changes at work within the Apprentice Institute itself. Mike had discussed how there had been some conflict within the staff in how they receive feedback, that in the past, because of the way that some of their staff had received negative feedback, their organization had become conflict adverse and would be willing to push forward with ideas even if they weren't the best, to keep the peace and prevent people from having a negative experience within the organization. And so a new development within their community is to provide honesty and feedback and work through some of those ideas about how to receive feedback even in a negative context. And so the change that's at work here is that they're able to provide honest feedback, maybe even for the first time. The organizational change between the Apprentice Institute and Friends University is starting to take place, but there's quite a gap that these institutions need to bridge between. As discussed in the culture piece earlier, the Apprentice Institute, it has an entrepreneurial spirit and is always looking for a new idea or a better way to move forward. And they're a ministry organization. And so for them, their goal is to create the best experience possible for a student. And a byproduct of that will be revenue. So they're not as worried about the dollars and cents, but more worried about the best experience for students and the best way for them to learn. While Friends University is on the other end of this spectrum. They're an academic institution that's been in place for over 100 years. And because some of the challenges that have existed for centers of higher education in terms of finances and those things, their primary focus is maintaining the institution, keeping the doors open. And so they're more focused on maintaining the bottom line. And because of that, they're less responsive to change. They're worried about keeping things in place. And so change comes much slower because of the risk that's involved with change. This change that's happening in the relationship between the Apprentice Institute and Friends University is in its early stages, and as we look at how they've started to relate to one another, looking at the Demas scale, they're currently in midst of this understanding that there's a defense against difference on both sides, both within the Apprentice Institute and within Friends University. The defense against difference talks about how there can be an us versus them mentality. And in fact, Mike used that language when we interviewed them, that was something they are working to move past, that there isn't the Apprentice Institute and Friends University, but they're one organization moving forward and working together. Cultural superiority is at work within this relationship as well, and that is clear on the university side in that they're willing to help in terms of provide additional support and resources to the Apprentice Institute, but they're only willing to do that as long as it operates within their structure, in a hierarchical structure, as you heard earlier. While the Apprentice Institute sees the university as slow-moving and unresponsive to students' needs. And in fact, Mike talked about how their organization has to slow down in order to move at the speed that the university is comfortable with. These institutions have very, very different cultural framework, and so this defense against difference is something that they're going to continue to need to work through, and it's created some conflict within the organization that you're going to hear about next.
Hello, my name is Ralph Holbrook. I will be discussing conflict as it pertains to the Apprentice Institute of Spiritual Formation and Friends University. As a Christian university, the historical background is based on their Quaker roots. While their DNA is based on Quaker values, they have become confrontation averse, leading to avoidance. Employees desire not to be seen as argumentative. The length of time in mediation before achieving resolution has become very cumbersome, and a culture of fear has been created within the organization that has made the relationship between the two entities difficult. Based on their cultural background, Friends University leadership has noted the lack of organizational health as it relates to conflict management. Town hall meetings lack engagement that leads to conflict resolution. Established meetings lack appropriate leadership challenge. Yet there is plenty of water cooler conversation outside the meeting. However, executive leadership is seeking long-term health through conflict management and the ability to openly challenge and disagree with one another. Overall, they have just begun to address conflict in a positive manner. Based on the dynamic change in the current educational system, the executive leadership may want to specifically focus on a strategic change to handle conflict in a way that continues to bring long-term health to the organization. In this way, a common ground may be established between the Friends University and Apprenticeship Institute, allowing both to achieve long-term goals. Dialectical theory can be used to address conflict between differing organizational structures, specifically between the established educational leadership of Friends University and the entrepreneurial style of Apprentice Institute. The desire is to allow values-based change to occur, focusing on opposing perspectives to challenge the status quo, thus allowing the creation of a new mode of operation for the larger university leadership body. As Mike mentioned in the interview, there are some interpersonal dynamics that are impeding conflict resolution. Several people do not handle criticism well, the team is avoiding hard conversations, and the leader of the Apprentice Institute can be very independent and leave some of the team on the outside. It may be beneficial for the team to complete a conflict inventory. I would recommend using the book by Speed V. Lees, Discover Your Conflict Management Style. This would be a short study for the team, allowing understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of each person's conflict management style. In addition, it will help the team know when to utilize the different styles depending on the situation. Since the team works to build spiritual formation, it may also be beneficial to apply Ken Sande's model of conflict resolution in his book, The Peacemaker. The steps include glorify God, get the log out of your own eye, gently restore, go and be reconciled. This will avoid the slippery slope of conflict avoidance and confrontation in team discussions. Once applied in the team setting, it may also be a visible model for the greater Friends University. As Steve noted as the key cultural challenge, Each group is working with basic assumptions that keep Friends University and Apprentice Institute from becoming one unified culture. Working on establishing a strategic change initiative, implementing concepts from dialectic theory, taking a conflict inventory and applying the lessons learned, along with initiating key peacemaker principles, will result in an improved conflict culture, bringing each one step closer to a unified organization.
We communicate a lot of different things a lot of different ways, so it's no wonder that it becomes so complicated at times, and why there's so many books written on it and entire majors dedicated to this. We hope to be able to discover some of the things that Apprentice does well, some of the things that they could work on, some of the things that maybe they can have better understand about who they're communicating with and their culture, so that they can better communicate with them and everybody can move a little closer to what we believe is their common goal. Apprentice is a young company, less than 10 years old, with only 6 people working there. And as such, their communication style, their leadership style matches that the leader has set forward. And they have a very transparent style of communicating, where they will get together weekly and they will debrief things, they'll highlight things, they'll kind of share things that they're struggling with, share things that are going well, and still be available to communicate with each other as needed throughout the rest of the week. This horizontal kind of way of doing things means that you can have person A, B, and C working here. Person A might run the point on one project and have B and C kind of report to them for that project. Then person C might run another project, and person A and B will report to them on that project, kind of giving them the point. What this means is they're able to do things, they're agile, they're nimble, and nobody is restricted from being able to talk to anybody. They care about honesty, they care about being clear with each other and moving forward, and they will be free to let somebody know if they think, oh, this could be done better, or maybe there's another way we can do this, or hey, that's really being well done, good job. They have the ability to just communicate with each other back and forth freely like that. Friends University has a lot more established tradition and culture than Apprentice does. They're over 100 years old. They have a much more top-down structure where you have president, then vice presidents, and directors and assistants below that. And when they have meetings, if it's a director-level meeting, the directors are there, and people below that aren't allowed to be there. You have to have a certain title in order to be in these meetings. Everything is much more established. It moves slower. Everything is deliberate. They're not nearly as nimble as Apprentice is. And recently they've gone through some major change as well. They had a president of the university was let go, and they have an interim president, and they're nervous to make change. And they're working on being more transparent than they used to be, whereas they were a very secretive kind of company before. There are definitely things standing in the way of Apprentice and Friends University being able to communicate effectively with each other. One of the main ones that stands right out is the fact that they have a completely different belief system around how people should communicate internally. Similar to Shine's study on Saibagiji versus DEC, DEC is more like Apprentice here, where anybody can talk to anybody, nobody is too far above anybody else, and the university is much more like Saibagiji, and where they didn't want anybody below them or even lateral to them to come up to them and tell them that there was something that they could work on or maybe something they could do differently. The company still has there's still some us versus them going on between these two kind of companies, the university and Apprentice, where when it's convenient, they'll say, well, that's kind of something you guys are supposed to do, instead of being able to work on things together. They have different goals. Apprentice is very focused on the spiritual development of the students. The university is focused on financial viability, followed by what's good for the student. There also tends to be, judged, as you can see by the us versus them, a little bit of a lack of trust between the two different institutions. Also, there doesn't seem to be total trust from Mike's point of view, from the point of view we got from the apprentice, about total trust between the people that work at the university. Shine makes it very clear that we need to understand how another culture functions, what makes it tick, and not just make general assumptions if we want to be able to communicate effectively within those cultures or to those cultures. Similarly, Bennett's DMIS shows us that we don't all necessarily operate the same just because we're human beings. There are different levels, or different orders of importance to us that affect how we operate and what we look for. In this case, Apprentice is definitely the underdog, the one who's trying to be the agent of change, and they need to be able to approach the university in a more methodical way, the way that makes sense to them. So they have a president, that, the boss, the owner, and they can inform him that this is what we need, this is what we're working towards, these are the ways that we could work together more effectively, and they can arm him with correct information and a little bit of passion, and then he can approach the people at the right levels at the university. He doesn't have to allow someone from his company to offend a vice president by just one of his standard employees coming up to him. That this university demands a little bit of recognition of their hierarchy. They see it as respect. So as the owner, he has the ability to go and talk to those people and then give them the respect that they feel they deserve, and he'll be a lot more likely to be heard, and it'll be a lot easier for them to communicate and work together. Also, there's one thing that is important to both of them, both the university and apprentice, and that is financial viability. And if they can speak that language together, if they can kind of focus around that a little bit, understanding that apprentices' overall mission is to develop their students spiritually, if they can show the university that they can partner with them and improve their financial viability while getting this done, I think they'll see a lot more success.
So at this point, we've evaluated the culture and the conflict and the communication, all in the midst of this environment of change that is happening at Friends University. And so at this point, just to conclude, just to kind of wrap things up, I did want to address some remaining questions that must be answered in order for the Apprentice Institute to continue to thrive at Friends University. So number one, how is the Apprentice Institute going to be financially sustainable? All the getting everything addressed isn't going to matter if they can't find themselves able to take care of themselves and to sustain themselves in a fiscally responsible way. Number two, what does Friends University want from the Institute? It needs to clarify and make certain it understands its role either as deeply embracing this Christian tradition, or really allowing the Friends University, really allowing the Apprentice Institute to just kind of be a side brand of the overall picture, but really needing to decide, make some decisions around the role of the Institute within the Friends University picture. So how does the Institute fit into the larger vision of Friends University? I think, again, once addressing these things, it's understanding as a Christian university would help kind of answer and solidify some of those questions. And finally, how does this align with the overall vision set forth by the Institute? Once Friends University, sets the parameters, sets the goals, how does that interact and form and continue to shape the Institute itself? And just a few concluding thoughts centered around these remaining questions, really focusing in on writing this operating agreement. The Apprentice Institute has to have an operating agreement in order to work under the umbrella of Friends University. And so this is the legally binding contract which tells them as an institute exactly what needs to happen and what their specific role and the parameters, the guidelines by which they are able to fill that role. And so we really want to encourage opening up communication in order to get some of these conflicts addressed, really tackling some of these tough questions and really looking at the remaining questions that we've just addressed in light of future outcome. And once again, what are the parameters the Institute must operate in? And does that allow both levels of the organization to thrive? Can Friends University continue to pay the bills and keep itself sustainable while allowing the Institute to continue to flourish and thrive and really do things with excellence? Ultimately, I think we see that as this operating agreement continues to get written out and gets agreed upon by both levels of the organization, I think everybody has to understand that a change in both cultures will need to take place in order for both levels of the organization to thrive. And so Friends University is going to have to maybe set its sights higher than just paying the bills and keeping the door open, while at the same time the Apprentice Institute is going to have to answer this question of sustainability and being fiscally responsible, being able to pay the bills and keep the lights on, so to speak.